The wind howled through the massive glass windows of the luxurious penthouse, rattling them, as if the universe itself was warning of the storm that was about to unfold inside. The chandelier above trembled slightly, casting eerie shadows across the marble floors. In the middle of it all stood a young woman, her face pale with terror, her hands trembling as she reached out desperately. "Daddy, do not do this. I am begging you." Her voice cracked, filled with desperation. But her father did not even flinch. The man before her, tall, powerful, and dressed in an immaculate designer suit, stood with his back turned, gazing out at the sprawling city skyline. His reflection in the window showed an expression of cold determination, one that had built his empire and made him one of the wealthiest men in the country. But tonight, his wealth, his power, his influence, none of it mattered. What he was about to do would change their lives forever. The young woman, no older than 24, took a hesitant step forward. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to understand how the father who had once cradled her in his arms, who had wiped away her childhood tears, could stand there now, unmoved by her cries. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "You don't have to do this. There's another way." "I know there is." But the man remained silent. His hands, clenched into fists, trembled slightly, betraying a moment of hesitation. For a fleeting second, she thought he might reconsider, that the man she knew, the father who had always protected her, was still in there somewhere. Then, in one swift motion, he turned to face her. His eyes, once warm and full of love, were now cold, unreadable. His jaw was set, his decision made. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low but firm. "This is the only way." She shook her head violently, stepping back as fear gripped her chest. "No, it's not. You're better than this, Daddy." The air between them felt heavy, charged with an intensity that neither could break. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, as if nature itself was mirroring the storm within the penthouse. Then, as if in slow motion, he reached into his pocket. Her breath hitched, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. What was he about to do? Was this truly happening? "Daddy, please," she sobbed, falling to her knees. "I'm your daughter." The man hesitated for just a second, just long enough for hope to flicker in her heart. But then, with a final heavy sigh, he took a step forward, and the world around them shattered. The moment seemed frozen in time. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something that neither of them could escape. The young woman's breath came in short, shallow gasps as she watched her father take another slow step toward her. His face, once so familiar and comforting, now seemed like that of a stranger. She wanted to believe that this was a nightmare, that at any second she would wake up in her childhood bedroom, safe and warm, and all of this would disappear. But the cold marble beneath her knees and the trembling of her own hands reminded her that this was real. "Daddy," she whispered, barely able to form the word. He exhaled deeply, his expression hardening. "You don't understand, sweetheart. You've never understood." A lump formed in her throat. "Then make me understand," she pleaded, "because right now, all I see is the man who raised me, turning into someone I don't recognize." For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, pain, she couldn't be sure, but whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced once more by that cold, unreadable mask. "You think this is easy for me?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "You think I want this? Then stop," she cried, her voice raw with emotion. "You can stop this right now." But he only shook his head, as if the decision had already been made long before this moment. She could feel her pulse hammering against her skin. She had spent her whole life idolizing this man, believing he was invincible, that there was no problem he couldn't fix. He had built his empire from the ground up, clawing his way to the top with nothing but sheer determination. And yet, in all the years she had known him, she had never seen him look this lost. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Her mind raced through everything she knew about him, about their life, about the secrets he had always kept locked away. Her father was a man who controlled everything, his business, his family, even his emotions. But tonight, he wasn't in control. "Daddy," she said, her voice steadier now. "Tell me the truth. What's really going on?" His jaw tightened. "This isn't about you, sweetheart. You need to stay out of it." "How can I?" she shot back. "I'm your daughter. Whatever this is, I deserve to know." The storm outside roared louder, lightning flashing across the city skyline, illuminating the tension in the room. The man who had always shielded her from the harshness of the world was now the very thing she was afraid of. "You're not safe," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's why I have to do this." The words sent a chill down her spine. Not safe? What did that mean? Her father had powerful enemies. She had always known that. He was a man who had fought ruthless battles in business, made deals that others wouldn't dare to make, and kept secrets buried so deep that even she wasn't allowed to know them. But if he was afraid, if he truly believed she was in danger, then whatever he was involved in had to be worse than she had ever imagined. "Tell me everything," she demanded, standing up now, her fear momentarily replaced by determination. "If I'm in danger, I deserve to know from what? From who?" He ran a hand over his face, as if the weight of the situation was finally settling in. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice strained. A deal I never should have agreed to." She swallowed hard. "What kind of deal?" His eyes darkened. "One that puts you in the middle of something I can't get you out of." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her mind flashed back to all the times she had seen glimpses of this side of her father. The hushed phone calls, the late-night meetings, the way his expression would turn cold whenever certain names were mentioned. She had never questioned it before, had never wanted to believe that her father's success came at a cost. But now, standing in the middle of this lavish penthouse, feeling the weight of his secrets pressing down on her, she realized that the price of his success had been far higher than she had ever imagined. "Daddy," she said again, softer this time, "if you're in trouble, we can fix it, together. But whatever you're about to do, it's not the answer." His gaze locked onto hers, a storm raging behind his eyes. "You don't understand," he murmured. "It's already too late." And then a sharp knock echoed through the penthouse. She flinched. He stiffened. For a moment, neither of them moved. The knock came again, more forceful this time. "Daddy," she whispered, her throat tightening. "Who is that?" His expression turned, grim. "The people I made the deal with." A cold wave of fear washed over her. She barely had time to react before the door handle turned, and everything changed. The door handle turned slowly, the sound cutting through the heavy silence, like a knife. She held her breath, every muscle in her body tightening. Her father didn't move, his eyes locked on the door, his face unreadable. Then the door swung open. Two men stepped inside. Their suits were sharp, their movements precise, and their presence filled the room with an unmistakable sense of control. They weren't just businessmen. They were the kind of men who made decisions that couldn't be undone, the kind of men who never had to raise their voices to be feared. Her father exhaled sharply. You're early. The taller of the two men smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We like to be ahead of schedule. She took an unconscious step back, her pulse racing. The air in the room felt different now, heavier, like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. The second man's gaze landed on her. I see you haven't told her everything yet. Her father's jaw tightened. She doesn't need to know. Her stomach twisted. Know what? She demanded, looking between them. Daddy, what are they talking about? The taller man tilted his head, amused. Shall we? He said, gesturing toward the sleek leather couch, as if this were just another business meeting. Her father didn't move. Say what you came to say, he said stiffly. The second man sighed, as if disappointed. Very well. He turned his attention back to her. Your father made a promise, a deal if you will, one that involved you. The room spun. Involved me, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's hands clenched into fists. I told you, he said, his voice sharp. This is between me and you. She has nothing to do with it. The man chuckled. You keep saying that, but we both know it's not true. He turned back to her, his expression calculated. Your father borrowed something from us, something he couldn't pay back. And when a man like him runs out of money, he offers something else instead. Her blood turned cold. She looked at her father, hoping, praying, that he would deny it. But he wouldn't meet her eyes. Tell me it's not true, she whispered. Silence. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Daddy, she choked out. What did you do? Finally he looked at her, and in his eyes she saw it. Regret, sorrow, and a deep, aching guilt that told her everything she needed to know. The deal had been real, and she had been part of it. A sharp pain shot through her chest. She had spent her whole life believing her father would do anything to protect her. But now, standing in the middle of this cold, unfamiliar moment, she realized that sometimes the people who love you, the most are also the ones who hurt you the deepest. The taller man leaned forward slightly. It's simple, he said. Your father has one last chance to fix this. He can pay his debt the way he promised. Or he let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken threat lingering between them. Her father's shoulders sagged. He looked tired, defeated in a way she had never seen before. Please, he said, barely more than a whisper. Give me more time. The second man shook his head. We've already given you time. He glanced at her. The choice is simple. Either you honor the agreement or you walk away with nothing. Her stomach twisted. The way they spoke, so calm, so certain. It made her sick. She turned to her father, her voice shaking. And what if I say no? The room fell silent. The taller man smirked. That's up to your father. Her father looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. And for the first time, she saw the man behind the title, behind the wealth and power. He wasn't just the invincible millionaire she had always known. He was just a man who had made a mistake, a man who had let his greed, his desperation, lead him down a path he could no longer escape from. A man who was about to lose everything. She took a deep breath, her heart hammering. Then slowly, she stepped forward and placed a hand on her father's arm. Daddy, she said softly. It's over. His eyes flickered with pain. I never wanted this for you, he whispered. I know, she said. But we can't fix the past, only the future. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then finally he nodded. A slow, reluctant nod that carried the weight of a man surrendering to his fate. He turned back to the men. I won't do it, he said, firmly. The deal is off. A long silence stretched between them. Then, the taller man sighed, shaking his head as if disappointed. "Shame," he said. "We had such high hopes for you." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, the second man following close behind. They didn't threaten. They didn't shout. They didn't have to. The message was clear. As the door shut behind them, she let out a shaky breath, the tension in her body finally releasing. Her father exhaled slowly, running a hand through his graying hair. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. She took his hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. "Then we'll figure it out," she said. Together. For the first time that night, he gave her a small, tired smile. And as the storm outside finally began to fade, so did the storm inside the penthouse. The past could not be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And whatever came next, they would face it together.